Okay, well, welcome, fellow Intrepid travelers. I'm Linda Feagler. I'm an Ohio freelancer, and I'd love to welcome you to our panel this afternoon on Intrepid traveling. And we have two wonderful, wonderful authors who are going to share their insights with us about the people and places near and far that they love and have researched. First off, David Mould, Professor Emeritus of Media Arts and Studies at Ohio University. Go Bobcats! Has traveled widely in Asia and Southern Africa as a trainer, consultant, and researcher, and has written articles and essays for newspapers, magazines, and online media. Born in the UK, he worked as a newspaper and TV journalist before moving to the US in 1978. And last but not least, we have Brad Ricca, and he's the author of numerous bestsellers, including the Edgar Award-winning nominated Mrs. Sherlock Holmes, and the one we all know and love, which received the Ohioana Award, Superboys, about the guys who created Superman. And you live in Cleveland. So welcome, Brad and David. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I'm hoping that whoever would like to start, this is a very informal conversation. So whoever would like to start, can we talk about what sparked the idea for your latest book? You want to start, David, since Brad's taking a drink there, a sip?
All right, okay. Well, let me just first explain my background here. This is Mount Mulanje, and that's on the border of Malawi and Mozambique in southern Africa. And I guess I should provide a caveat here. I didn't actually climb this mountain, but I, sat on the terrace of the hotel with a beer and chambo fish from Lake Malawi and admired it from afar. But I mean, actually, this is an example of where topography, a landmass, does kind of define a border. I've kind of been interested by books called Postcards from the Borderlands. I've been interested in borders really since childhood. As you said, I was born and brought up in the UK, and my parents took my sister and myself on camping vacations in France and Spain and Italy. It's always really exciting to cross a border, the border guards and the fences and the barriers. I mean, to me, that was a highlight of the trip, not the beach, but, crossing the national borders. But as I kind of went on to my career as a journalist, and later an academic, I came to think more about borders. Are they simply fences and barriers and guard posts, or should we think of them more broadly? And in the mid-1990s, I worked in Central Asia, the former Soviet republics of Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. And the borders there are really crazy. They duck in and out and around and about. And I started asking, why are the borders this way? Why were the borders drawn this way? These were borders between the old Soviet socialist republics. And they were done to keep down ethnic groups, to make sure that no ethnic group had a majority in a particular area. The borders were gerrymandered and then kind of reproduced when these countries became independent. So I was fascinated by borders. Most recently, I've been working in South Asia, in Bangladesh. And one fun fact about Bangladesh is its border with India is about 2,500 miles long. That's about half the border between the US and Canada, half the length of that border. And the question is, why is the border that way? Well, it all has to do with the way in which British India was sliced and diced in 1947 between majority Muslim Pakistan, majority Hindu India. The political decisions that were made which changed and transformed the lives of many people. So that's kind of my fascination with borders, and in the book I go to a bunch of other places and kind of look not only at the kind of the physical or the political borders, but at class borders, ethnic group borders, and what I call like the borders of our minds, a way that we kind of look at other places that are not familiar to us. So that's what sparked my idea.
Well, tell me, I know you're a professor emeritus at Ohio University. What led you to that part of the world?
It was quite serendipitous. I ended up in southern Kyrgyzstan 4 years after the fall of the Soviet Union because a colleague had a job to do there and he couldn't go there. And he said, "Can you go to Kyrgyzstan?" And I said, "Where?" And he said, "Well," and at that point, I'm pretty good at geography, but there still was this sort of blank on the map, all of these funny little countries whose names end in Stan. But I went there, I worked, I went back, I had a Fulbright fellowship, I've worked in and out of Central Asia for about 15 years, till about 2012. And then that actually was sort of the genesis for my first book, Postcards from Stanland, Journeys in Central Asia. I wrote email essays back to friends and family, and then after a few years, I had enough to put together with extra research for a book. And the title actually is a kind of a nonsense title, Stanland. I would come back to my university, and people say, "Where have you been?" I said, "I've been to Kyrgyzstan." They said, "Kurdistan?" I said, no, that's in Turkey and Iraq and Syria, and it's not actually a country, Kyrgyzstan. They said, "Somewhere between China and Iran." I said, "Well, sort of, north of Pakistan." And they'd say, "Oh, all of those countries whose names end in Stan, you've just been in Stanland." But that's actually total nonsense, because the word Stan in Persian means land. So literally I'd been in Landland or La La Land.
Right.
But it sort of points to our kind of ignorance or lack of attention to a part of the world that historically has been very significant, and could be in the future. So that's my story.
And Brad, you've been all over the literary map. Of course, Superboy's really brought Superman to the fore, created by Tim. But I'm a big mystery fan, and I loved your Sherlock Holmes book. Talk about quite an eclectic range of subjects that you have, and also your new book that'll be coming out soon.
So this is the book that's out now. This is Olive the Lionheart. And after I wrote Mrs. Sherlock Holmes, my story is, just to warn everybody, it's not nearly as exciting and adventurous as David's, because I didn't really go anywhere. But I wrote this true crime book, Mrs. Sherlock Holmes, and the whole thing takes place in a cellar, basically, and it's really depressing. And after that, I was like, no more. I want to write about something outside. Which I know is kind of a dumb reason to pick a book, but I knew I had. I wanted to. It's ironic now, right? I wanted to write about race. I tend to start with big general subjects, and Africa was really interesting to me. Things I don't know much about, and I just looked for stories, and I started in magazines and newspapers and history books, and I literally ran across Olive's story, which was this kind of Scottish socialite who, in the early part of the 20th century, her fiance, who's this big naturalist, goes on an excursion to Africa, an expedition, and he disappears. And he's presumed dead, and she does this kind of unthinkable thing and goes after him. And she has no experience. She has no experience going to Africa, no experience really going anywhere, and she just goes. And to me, that seemed like a terrific story. And once I hear something like that, it makes me want to learn more about it, get involved with it, and maybe tell it. Because it was a story that had been completely lost, just little bits and pieces here and there in old newspapers. So that's kind of what always gets me going, is a story that hasn't been told before. And I know that can kind of sound like really pompous, telling the stories that have never been told. But I really like those stories. It's not I don't mean to bash Abraham Lincoln, but there's 1,000 books on Abraham Lincoln, and there's probably more. And by saying this, I probably jinx myself, and I'll want to write about Lincoln. Stop me if I ever do that. But I like the stories where you can kind of find your own way. So following, doing a little bit of, not to push this too far, but exploring on your own through research, and So not really going to Africa myself, but kind of going through it through her footsteps, after her footsteps, through the research and so on. That's what gets me motivated to explore a story.
Well, I do want to ask you, because you've written so many wonderful tales. I wanted to ask you about Superboys, because that really brought the Superman authors to the fore. Can you talk about, and it's a different genre than travel. Both, this is our travel panel. We're going to be talking about that, our travel panel. But could you talk about where you found that, why that story captivated you? How you stumbled on that?
Yeah, I mean, Superboys was easy because I just grew up with it. I heard, I'm from Cleveland. I would hear it. My dad would tell these tales from the station wagon. Oh, Superman was created in Cleveland, and I would say, no, he wasn't. That's I love Cleveland, but Cleveland's not that cool. But then that just steamrolled. But that was different because I knew every corner of Cleveland, and I could go to the ones I hadn't been. But with Olive's story, I'd never been to Africa. I thought about going for the story because I thought, I could get like a cool khaki vest and a hat. But then I thought, if I go to Africa, then the story is about me going to Africa and not about her. So it was just that idea of her kind of bucking every norm there is, not only as she's fairly young, but she's a woman, but especially at this time, this is this colonial Africa that she just goes. And it started out as this kind of, I thought, this is kind of like a reverse Tarzan story almost. And but it ended up being something so different from what I thought it would be. And I ended up writing about things that I had no idea were part of the story. That really made it worth it. That's part of that. I like a story where I don't know where it's going to end. And again, it's just part of that moving through it.
Okay. And I do want to invite our listeners to type in any questions in the chat feature. Just click on chat at the bottom of your screen, and please send some questions along if you have them. We'll be happy to address those. Can you talk, guys, about what captivates you about the travel genre? You obviously are veteran travelers, but talk to me about that. Also, keeping it fresh as well.
Okay, I guess I can start. But by the way, I think that Brad would look splendid in one of those safari hats and a khaki vest. Yeah.
Good target for the Lions, right?
Yeah. You're sort of Theodore Roosevelt or Ernest Hemingway pose, even. I guess what fascinates me is, I've always loved to read about places I have not visited and try to sort of carry myself to those places in my own mind. And I think the people, the Paul Theroux's, the Pico Ayers, the Colin Thebrans, the great travel writers, evoke a great sense of place. They make you, even if you haven't been there, even if you have been there, you feel as if you are in the square, in the mountains, by the river, with the people, eating the food, and so creating that sense of place, I think, is sort of really, really important. And I think that's what I try to do. And it's sometimes tricky. One of my, I guess this is one of your later questions, but I'll deal with it now. One of the things I do almost reflexively is I try to record what I'll call first impressions. The things that you see about a place that strike you as interesting or unusual. And maybe you're watching as you're being driven from the airport to the hotel, the things that the people who live in this country or this city find commonplace, find every day, the things they do not notice, but to you are interesting and strange. So I'll give an example here. I've been to Madagascar several times, and on my first trip there, everything was really interesting, fascinating. The architecture, the signs. I described the capital, Antananarivo, as Paris with rice paddies. I mean, literally, it's built on the hills with churches on top of the hills and rice paddies with ducks running around all over. I mean, the second time I went, some of this was familiar. I didn't write as much down. The third, the fourth time, less and less. So those first impressions, they can be just kind of random little things. I saw this sign. What's that person doing? Those are really important. And then you come back later and you kind of put that together. But that, I think, is the way that you try to create a sense of place. Also, I think encounters with people, and there don't need to be formal interviews. It can be what the waiter said to you in the restaurant that you misunderstood in French or whatever. So I'm like take like a vacuum cleaner approach to this, and I sort of suck in all of this and write it down and make notes and kind of do maybe preliminary little essays that I sort of post on Facebook and send to family and friends, and then later pull it together, try to connect the dots, amplify with research. But I think creating a sense of place, a sense of a culture, and I know there's a Thoreau has talked a little bit about this, that, the old foreigner coming in and saying, oh, isn't this an interesting culture, can seem a little bit, I don't know, even colonial in his output. But I think, it's revealing to people. I mean, I think that sometimes the outsider looking in on a culture actually in some ways can be more revealing than somebody who's lived in the culture and have recognized everything as very familiar. I mean, there's not much to talk about then. It's all very familiar.
Yeah, I would underscore that the sense of place is so important, and you named those big writers that do it. I mean, Hemingway always does that, and I write about the past, and I think I always tell writing students that there's ways to do that too. The writing nonfiction of the past is once they invent time travel, it's worthless. I won't have a job. But I always tell students it's more like a crime scene, that you can find postcards and pictures and see what it looks like, see what the colors are, find out what they ate, find out what the temperature was. All these things can combine to, and I say that because Ohioana always has, great audiences of people who are, writers too. Putting that together can give you a sense of place that can really let you get into, what your main story is. Just that description means so much to travel writing, I think. I mean, I kind of ended up writing this, book about Africa sitting in my attic because I had two little kids, and I was going to go a couple places, and we're like, no, I can't really leave because it would be even crazier than it was. So it made it quite the challenge, but it was really, in some ways, it allowed more imagination to come into it, to really try and bring that sense of place to life. Which we all know now, sitting at home for so long, these kind of narratives have become really important. And people just say, oh, it's just escape. No way. I mean, this is lifeblood. When you're at home, if you're going, you read a book about someplace real, or you read a book about someplace that's complete fantasy, it kind of does the same thing if you have a really good sense of setting and place, whether it's, you're going to Madagascar, you're going to Middle Earth, right? It's kind of the same thing to get out of your where you're boxed in a little bit.
And David had mentioned some of his favorite travel authors. Brad, do you have some that you would recommend?
I have kind of weird travel authors because I don't. I read a lot to get ready for this, and that's one reason I did it, because it was a real gap in what I knew about. But I kept going back to a lot of the fiction ones that I really like Hemingway. David mentioned Thoreau too. I love Thoreau's descriptions. I know he's kind of not like popular now, but I love the fact that he just sat there in this right by the pond and just describes everything from the worms to the sticks. But I'm trying to think of who else. I read a lot of like people who ended up not becoming famous, who would just write travelogues of Africa, and I could find their book and get it delivered to the library, and they're only like 3 copies, and there's, for whatever reason, they just didn't hit it big. But I would just love it because they were all these first person narratives of people's and a lot of women too who went to Africa, and that was important to me too. And Olive too, who I wrote about, wrote her own book about going to Africa, and that was a huge resource for me.
Are there any special challenges in writing about travel? David, do you want to start with that? Any that you have found through the years?
Firstly, I should say that most of my travel has been, not to write about travel. I haven't been lucky enough to be able to earn a living as a travel writer. So I've worked for international agencies, most recently for UNICEF, and they send me to interesting places. They send me to India and Bangladesh and Madagascar and other places as well. And I write as I go. Now, so I think, the challenges there are to be in a place long enough to understand as much as you can, and that's kind of my frustration that I'm working all day, I'm doing a workshop, or I've got to go to someplace else, so I'm picking things I go, and I mean, so then I have to sort of put together the pieces later. The other challenge, I think, is what I will call, and this is more about the writing, moving from the close-up to the wide shot, to use a visual analogy here. And what I try to do is I try to, tell a story about a person, somebody I've met, some exchange I've had, or about a place, and then pull back, to talk about the historical context or the political context, or why farmers in Madagascar are moving from the countryside to the town. So pulling back, because you can tell a lot of really cool and funny travel stories, and I've got plenty of those, encounters at borders and getting stopped by cops and hit up for bribes and stuff like that. But trying to pull back from that to tell the reader, gives the reader something about the society, the culture, the historical context. I think that is the challenge. And sometimes it works well, and sometimes it doesn't work as well. I mean, some people say to me, "Oh, I just want your, funny travel experiences." And I say, I really can't write about that or just about that, because I think, it's my, this is going to sound terribly pompous, I think it's my duty to actually explain to you why a country like Madagascar still suffers from, its colonial heritage, why, why Bangladesh is such a crowded country and why its borders are the way that they are. So if I can start from a story, an encounter, and then pull back to something that gives people something of the context without sort of beating them up, academically with too much information.
There must be a balance there to do that.
There's a difficult balance, but I think one can do it. I think the individual can help to illustrate or draw people into the broader story, the point you're really trying to make.
Brad, how about you? Any special challenges?
I think the challenge that I always feel when I'm writing about a place that, I've never been, but that's kind of, when you're writing about the past, you're never there. You can't be there. You just kind of have to do your best guess. I always worry that I get it wrong. And especially with Africa, that was a big, I tried really hard, because you don't want to like put a mountain someplace it's not, or get the trail wrong.
Night sometimes I could see where that would be,
Yeah, or this kind of snake isn't gonna be here. But I got this great email from somebody who lived in Africa for like 15 years, that said, "Oh, you really got Lake Chad totally right." And I was just on top of the world for like 3 weeks. But it was all Olive, because she kept diaries, and she was, I could not have done it without her. But that's always a big challenge.
Okay.
I think that's really important. I mean, obviously what Brad's done is he's double, triple sourced as much as he can, to try to make sure he gets Lake Chad in the right place and well described. And I was fascinated, Brad, by what you were saying earlier about looking at other contemporary accounts, and they don't have to be great accounts. They don't have to have been bestsellers, because that's a wonderful time in history. It's a time of history I love, because people were writing diaries, people were writing letters, and and sometimes they all went into books. So you have a wealth of documentary material. So if you're looking at Lake Chad, or you're looking at Mount Mulanje in the background for me, you can find people who have been there and talked about it, put those accounts together, and then, without leaving your attic, you can really conjure up that sense of place. I think that's great.
Would we like to talk a little bit about where your research have taken you through either the current book or past books? And have there been any surprises you've encountered along the way? Brad, you want to
start? With this book, it was more, I thought, I knew where she went. That was pretty easy. I could point it out on a map, and I knew where she went. And I'm not going to give away the ending, but I knew the whole itinerary. But I didn't know what happened. I knew some of the things that happened, but I didn't know what really happened to her during the trip. And I kind of wrote the book. I wrote a draft of it, and I said, "Oh, this is pretty good. This will be fine." And then all of a sudden, I found that she had diaries that I had not found the first time. I found them almost by accident, and they were in a.
Find it. That must have been a real aha moment for you. How did you?
It really was. Well, it was, especially because the book was due in like 4 months, and well, like 6 months, but. Yeah, and I got it. They were in a castle in Scotland, and I was going to go. But this kid was on it, so I don't mean to like blame him, but and I got in touch. There was this great guy.
Right.
Yeah, I feel bad. I did blame him. There's this great guy, the curator at the castle, and he said, we do have these, and it didn't seem like anyone had looked at them, and he would scan them for me and send them, over the internet. And because of the time change, the only time we would connect would be like 4 in the morning, where I was up with the new baby, and he would be sending me these diaries that she kept. And they completely changed the story of, and this goes to what David was saying, she had written a travel log, which a lot of people did back then, and they were really popular. And just like David said, they're so great to read. And hers was, not super cheery, but it was, it seemed pretty, seemed true. She didn't like gloss over things, but had great detail, talks about the tribes they saw and all this stuff. But then you read these diaries and you realize that her experience, her personal, emotional experience, was completely different. I call it kind of the Facebook effect. That, she says, status is great. Here's this picture of me on a yacht and everything's great during the pandemic, and the reality is, we're all falling apart. So it completely changed the story for me, but it made me, realize that writing about someone traveling, writing about someone's adventures, you really don't know what's going on. And I got lucky by seeing her diaries and her letters, and they just completely changed what the story was about. And I won't spoil it, but it's the I still struggle with adjectives for it, but and I don't want to say it was just completely unexpected to
Was that a
me.
hard shift for you to make? Because you had in your head, one way, and suddenly you find this treasure trove. Was that difficult to veer off?
It was, but it made everything make sense. So, and the only thing, because they're so personal, is I had, kind of a moment where, well, should I even, use these? And then you think, she's been, gone for a very long time. And I used to work on Emily Dickinson, and that they kind of, Emily Dickinson people kind of have the same thing. Well, did she, mean for these poems to be read or just stuffed away? And I'm always, I don't know, but I always think if you write something, you want someone to read it. And she made sure they were kept. So I didn't put everything in, but I put a lot of it in. And it really threw me, but it was her story. So I felt like if I don't let her change the story, then it's not her story anymore. And this is what David was saying too, that you have like an obligation to the truth here. So I did write about, what she was going through emotionally. I mean, it's still an adventure story. It just has different levels of different things going on in it. And I'm trying hard not to spoil it, because I really hate when people
No, don't
spoil.
do that. Don't do that.
It really is. It's more about, it answers the question why she went, and the why was not really to find her fiance.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's like a good adventure itself. If you plan out everything on a trip, you usually have a bad time, right? And if you say, okay, we'll leave this last couple days, we'll go wherever we like, then it's usually better. So.
Okay. And David, you've acclimated yourself to so many different situations. Can you talk about any that through your travels that were surprising to you, or countries
Well, I just want to underline what Brad said. I was about to make the same point, and he made it for me here.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, no, that's okay. But I have the quote to sum it up. It's from a guy called Thomas Swick, who was a travel writer, done some interesting stuff, and he said, "Travel is only interesting when things go wrong." And I mean, but that sums it up. As you say, if you plan out a trip, and this is going to happen here and this is going to happen there, then there are usually no surprises. And so I work best in the developing world, where things usually don't work very well. And it's not just a question of language, or it's sometimes a question of, infrastructure, where, you've got to really make an effort to figure out how to get the bus from here to here, or how to get from this place to this place. Nothing is clear, nothing is sorted out. So that you have to negotiate your way around. And that to me is totally fascinating. I am totally lost if somebody puts me on a tour bus and takes me somewhere and shows me something and puts me back on. I mean, and that's the difference between travel and tourism. Okay. I mean, not that tourism is not fun, but I I hate for things to be too organized. I would rather ramble around on my own. Now, there are some dangers involved, okay? And I mean, I don't deliberately put myself in danger, but I think it's always, I made a mistake once. I was in Karachi in Pakistan, which is, one of the more dangerous cities in this world. There's terrorists there, the Pakistan Taliban is there. And so on the first day, I'm at this hotel, kind of out in this sort of port area, and I don't have my workshop started yet, so I go wandering around. I kind of go walkabout, and I come back, and my hosts meet me the next day, and they say, "What did you do? Did you have a sleep?" I said, "No, I walked around there." They said, "You did what?" "Don't ever leave this place unless we're with you again." And so I've had a couple of those experiences. I mean, where probably I should have gone further than I should. I mean, there was no trouble in the end, but I think one of the things I learned from that is the importance of local knowledge. I'm going to draw a distinction here. Talking to people even before you go there about what they would advise. Some people can be a little overprotective, but they have that local knowledge and they can see things that perhaps are dangerous that you can't perceive yourself. I make the distinction between that and what I'll call the travel advisory issue. I mean, the US State Department and other governments as well periodically issue travel advisories. Americans should not go to such and such a country. Pakistan's a good example here. Yes, there are places in Pakistan, the northwest frontier provinces near Afghanistan, which are probably dangerous to go. 90% of the country is probably perfectly peaceful, and they'd love to see you and, take a few of your dollars. So people say to me, "Do you read the travel advisories?" I said, "Oh, yes, I do, on the plane as I'm leaving." But I think if a lot of people get very, very worried in advance. And if you worry too much in advance, you are never going to travel at all. I mean, so don't put yourself in unnecessary danger. Build relationship with local people, but don't get put off by official announcements and stuff like that.
What kind of mindset, David, do you suggest for those of us who are type A's who want everything programmed but would like how do we change our mindset?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just kind of go. I mean, I like things to be reasonably well organized, at least in terms of my work. But other things I just try to go with the flow. And if somebody says, "Would you like to drive out with me to see my, my little place in the highlands of Madagascar?" I say, "Yeah, I'd love to go." I mean, it's there's still that sort of sense of adventure there. I mean, as long as it's somebody that you trust. There's risks involved all of the time. But again, if you're not prepared to take some risks, then you don't travel, or you stay stuck in your hotel, watching CNN. I don't know. I don't want to do that.
Well, Brad, you want to start us off here? What can you talk a little bit about the writing process? What that's like for you? And do you guys, do you ever have writer's block? Now, somebody said, no, I never have writer's block. Like, okay. Can you talk a little bit about what the writing process is like for you, Brad? And do you ever
yeah, that's a great question. So I always tell students that, that kind of the same thing. Oh, writer's block doesn't exist because you can always just start typing something. And that sounds great, but it's not like, of course you get writer's block. So I kind of, my writing process has changed a lot just by virtue of, and this is kind of silly, but by having kids. Sorry, I had to get out for a second. I had to deal with an emergency, not an emergency, but so I have less time. And I find that the less time I have, the more focused I have to be if I'm going to get any writing done. Okay. So I think the writing process for me, the best advice is I can ever give someone who wants to write and who has writer's block is just, and I used to hear this for years, and I always wanted to be a writer my whole life. And I would just say, just totally dismiss it, but you just have to find some time every day to write, whether it's 2 hours at a coffee shop or 2 hours at night or 6 hours at night or 20 minutes on your phone, which I guess you can do. Yeah, is just find time and just do it. And even if you don't know what you're going to do, if you have that writer's block, there's something in there that you want to do. So like I didn't know this story. Well, I kind of want to write about Africa, so let me just start writing about that. And of course, research helps enormously, I think, if you have writer's block. Even especially if you're writing fiction. Just think about something you want to do, look into it more, and that's going to spark something. So just you have to write every day. It's one of those that's a huge, complete and utter cliche of writing. And I'm telling you, I used to roll my eyes at it too, but it's the only way.
I think it's probably easy to get out of sync with doing that. You really have to keep that shot.
Totally. Yeah.
I know I worked at a newspaper for 10 years, and 7 of those I was an editor. And although I edited other people's stuff, I didn't write anything. And it became almost a mental thing with me to sit down and try to start writing again, which I never thought was possible, which is why we'll never be in that situation again. But is it a good time for you, Brad, morning, noon, night, to write? Do you have a certain ritual that you have?
I wrote this book, Olive, in a coffee shop in the mornings. Well, one of the kids was in preschool. Everyone's different. The one I'm finishing now has just been, kind of pandemic time, which is the weird, like, no time. You think you have a lot of time, but you have no time because there's no schedule. If you have to go to work or you have to go out to work, or if you have to work on your computer, it's just everything's just bananas. So that's been a little more of a challenge, but yeah, I think the older I get, it's whenever you can get it, morning or night, and with each new project, just kind of find out what works for you.
Okay. And David, how about you and your writing process?
Well, I was just thinking about something you just said, Linda, about your compulsion to write. That you need to write, yeah. And my joke about this is I've been a member of a writing group for 3 years and I'm still writing. It does not solve my addiction at all. I have a little bit of an advantage there, I think, because of my journalism background. I mean, I was a newspaper reporter for 3 years, and then I worked in television news in Britain for 5 years, and I had to knock it out every day. The program went on at 6 o'clock, and I had to knock out, however many news stories a day. So I got used to writing a lot and writing very quickly. And I think that's something, I mean, I don't write as quickly as I used to, but I think that has sort of stayed with me. But also that kind of discipline of the sort of the deadline discipline that I've had to face. Yeah, I'd agree with Brad that this sort of pandemic time has been, really, really weird. I haven't been able to travel, and so when we got to like about March last year, I started writing postcards from the borderlands, my third book on travel history and culture, and I wrote it like in 2.5 months.
Wow.
It was just really fast. Pitched it and had a publisher by July. So I would kind of agree that. You write something, and then you're always editing later. It's a continuous and iterative editing process. And you go back and you throw out stuff that you wrote before, but it's all a progression. I'd love to say that I kind of work with, structure and outlines and things like that, but I kind of just start writing and then it kind of flows on from there. That to me is the sort of the. I mean, it's not that I don't have notes and some idea of where I might be going, but I can find that some people kind of maybe over plan or over structure what they're doing, and I think then that sort of reduces the creative flow. Go off in a direction, and then if later you find it's really not tying into the story, you can junk it or you can take it out and use it for something else. So but again, I find I need to have concentrating time. I mean, the thought of actually doing 20 minutes on the phone is that would be very daunting for me. So I feel I need to have at least 2 or 3 hours concentrated, uninterrupted time to actually make some progress. But then I mean, turning out a couple of thousand, 2 to 3,000 words a day is actually not too big of a problem.
Well, let's talk about your next trip or your next writing project. Brad, you want to start with that? What's going on next?
Oh, were you asking me?
Well, Brad, if you like.
Brad, Brad, yeah, Brad, go ahead, yeah.
I don't have any trips planned. I want to go to Disneyland, but we'll see. My next book,
or is it actually a real trip that you can enjoy?
Oh no, I don't really have a trip planned. I wish I did, especially hearing David. I really just want to go somewhere because it's been a while. It's been a while for all of us. My next book comes out in September, and it goes to Jerusalem. I don't know why I picked these places. First Africa, then Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was really very difficult to write about. I first pitched it to my guy, and he said, "Oh, this sounds really great, but you have no idea about Jerusalem." Because I was like, "Oh, they went here and here," and he's like, "You've never been to Jerusalem, right?" I'm like, "Yeah," and he said, "Well, it really shows." So that was a lot of work. It's called True Raiders, and it's about a British guy, Monty Parker, who in 1911 goes off on an expedition to find the Ark of the Covenant. And he's guided by a secret mathematical code from the book of Ezekiel that this Finnish mystic finds. So it's really, it's real. It actually happened, but it's really.
Well, how did that come up?
What's that?
How did you just decide to do this? How was that idea sparked?
Raiders of the Lost Ark is my favorite film from being a kid. And when I heard that there was a story that it was actually based on, I just, I said, I have to write about this because it defies description. That people would really go and do something like this, and no one had really written about it. Has really written about it, so that was, yeah. So we'll see how that goes.
All right, David, how about you? What's up next for you?
Well, I just wanted to comment on this. I mean, Brad comes up with some wonderful, wonderful untold stories. And I know you made this point earlier there, but I mean, I think these are the great ones, these great historical stories that have not been covered much or are completely untold that you're able to put together. I'm excited.
That means a lot. Thank you.
Well, no, it really is terrific. Okay, for me, well, I have no idea when I'm going to be able to travel again. I'm working a project right now, which is in Cambodia, Laos, and the Philippines, but I have to work it remotely. I'm not traveling there. The project I've actually got a ghostwriting project now, which is actually American based, and it's the story of 3 families across basically 3 centuries from before the Revolutionary War through to about the 1960s. And these are prominent American families, one in Boston, one in New York, and one in Savannah, Georgia, who are tied together by money and marriage. And it reflects to some degree on kind of sort of ambivalent views on slavery. And this is a project which the person I'm working with, I mean, she's been collecting materials for more than 20 years and, has a room full of them and has problems turning it into a narrative. So it's kind of interesting because it's pushing me into a different area here. We have letters, we have diaries, and I can check the Civil War history and all of that. But it's also forced me to start to recreate build some scenes, build some dialogue, kind of the historical fiction part of it to kind of move the story along while still checking that, um, you know, these details about Boston in 1860 are accurate, and these details about Savannah after Sherman marches into the city are accurate as well. So it's been quite an interesting process so far, but she's taken 20 years and it's moving a little slowly. So that's my current project there. I'm also trying a little bit of fiction, and we'll see how that goes.
Okay. Well, before you say goodbye, I do want to ask you. I love print. I love books, and books come in many forms and many ways, but I really love the printed page and actually holding it. And I just wanted to get your thoughts for both of you about the future of print and the future of bookstores. I mean, I love bookstores. I go when I can go out, I go in them. But I know, especially technology now as we become more adept at it. David, do you want to start? Will there be a place for bookstores and books and bookshelves as we know them now?
Oh, I hope so. It's I honestly don't know. It's yeah. I hope that shelves of books are not going to just become a Zoom background.
Yes, that's right.
um,
Yes, that's right.
but I think it's a generational thing to some degree here. I think books will always be around, in some form or another. Again, I just have trouble, but I just like the feel of a book, and turning the pages and putting my bookmark in and things like that. But let's face it, there's a whole generation who don't have the same, haven't been brought up the same way, and all of these kids at school doing all their lessons online right now, it's so I'm concerned. I'm concerned about the future.
Brad, how about you?
Yeah, I think there's nothing, and it's easy to see you asking this question because look behind you, you have all these great bookshelves just packed with books. It's very nice.
It's wonderful in one room. I mean, this is some people have a million cats. I have books everywhere. So.
Oh yeah. There's nothing to me more important as a physical object that I love more than a book, and it can be like a really old book that you get and you pay way too much money for, or a surprise book that you got at half price books and it's signed, or a new book from an author you really love, or even just like some paperback that you just means something to you that you got in junior high. So I hope not. I really hope not. I mean, I think it's going to be easier for a lot, like Dave said, for a lot of this stuff to go digital. But I think there was a real fear of it maybe 10 years ago, and people kind of rebelled and they said, no, we want the books. So I think that's good. I'm more worried about the bookstores, especially after all this. I mean, one of the tragedies of this, I can't go down to Columbus and go to a book loft,
Oh my gosh.
It's the best. It's the best. I mean, talk about, signed stuff in there, and you spend hours in that store. And here in Cleveland,
you can literally get lost.
Oh, I've been lost in it several times. Yeah. I might still be there. No. Max Backs in Cleveland is my spot, and I worry about those places like I think all authors do and all book lovers do. And I haven't been in a bookstore in a while, and it's killing me. That's going to be one of the first things I do. So yeah.
Yep. And keep in mind that you can purchase the books at the book festival, including Brad's and David's at the Book Loft. And also, if you look online, there'll be resources for you to do that as well. So thank you both. First of all, thanks to the Ohioana staff and David Weaver for putting all this together. And thank you so much, David and Brad, for joining us and taking us out of our four walls today to new places. And let's hope that a year from now, I mean, we never really thought a year ago we'd be sitting here like this. Let's hope things are looking up and that we can be together again soon. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks to our audience too for sharing your afternoon with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Linda. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda.
Take care.
Bye-bye.